To the next edition of the Weichert Report's video blog. My name is Brandon Weichert, founder and CEO of the Weichert Report, and this is your world. Tonight's drink is a wonderful glass of the Macallan 15. It is a fantastic year and a nice complement to tonight's discussion. Tonight's discussion is going to be on a subject that I am probably most well versed in. Weichert Report obviously is a general journal on geopolitics. I take great pride in the fact that the unorthodox analysis methods that I use and that I subscribe to allow for the Weichert Report to really stand out on most geopolitical affairs. But in Washington, D.C. policy circles, I am probably most known as what someone at the Institute of World Politics usually refers to me as the space guy. I am a national security space policy expert, analyst, what have you. This is the issue area that I have focused most on in the last 5 years, 4 to 5 years. This has kind of become my bailiwick. And when I started the website, I didn't want to just focus on space issues because I actually am trained and well versed in a litany of pretty much all geopolitical as well as national security and defense policy issues. So I was trying to let people understand that I actually can talk about a litany of things, and that actually they all kind of link in with space policy. After all, whether we're talking American or Chinese or Russian or whatever, space policy is ultimately an outgrowth of, overall policy and overall geopolitical trends and whatnot of a given country. So anyway, tonight is going to be the discussion on the budding lunar and near-Earth economy. So it's a bit of an unorthodox subject for a national security space policy analyst. This is actually based in large part. This next vlog is based in large part on a small but significant chapter of my forthcoming book on national security space policy. When one talks national security space policy, they normally are referring to predominantly satellite defense, but then you can also expand it out and talk about weaponization of space and have that debate. But very rarely do we talk about the strategic implications as well as the kind of economic opportunities of space. National security space policy just doesn't really concern itself with that, but I argue it should. Recently, with the election of Donald Trump, there's been a very thankfully positive uptick in American space policy. Now we've had, really more than 8 years of fecklessness and indifference in not just the manned space flight program, but generally the entire space policy of America, civilian and military. In fact, warisboring.com back in October of 2016 did an excellent report by an Air Force colonel who basically, it was discovered that President Obama, very early on in his presidency, had insisted that national security space policy issues not be included in his intelligence brief. This is incredible because pretty much the entire American war machine, our military, and as well as our economy and civilian infrastructure are largely dependent on space assets in orbit, satellites. As I wrote for an article called "The Case for Space Dominance" for AmericanGreatness.com, which is basically that article was basically a kind of brief, very brief snapshot uh, of what my book is about. But as I articulated in that article, without our satellites, much of our military capacity is lost, much of our economic prowess is lost, and for this reason alone, we should be paying a lot more attention to space than we currently are. Indeed, rising states that are rivals, in the case of China and Russia, and then rogue states for different reasons, predominantly concerning their nuclear program, Iran and North Korea. These are kind of the four biggest threats to America's position in space. And it's not just, though, satellites. That's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the near term. And it isn't just about reinvigorating our manned space flight. That's the medium term. The long-term goal needs to be concerning itself with the positive opportunities that reside in space, that go beyond the military, that go into the civilian realm, and beyond just the communication and the kind of things that the satellites provide us. The moon. And I'm very heartened by what the Trump administration, incoming Trump administration, is doing. They're reinvigorating the space policy, the Space Council. They're bringing in experts who believe in the kinds of reform that I talk about in my lecture series that I give at different think tanks and particularly at the Institute of World Politics on national security space policy. I'm very heartened. I've previously worked, my previous employment was working for Capitol Hill. Working at the House of Representatives. I was very heartened to find that Congressman Jim Bridenstine, who is, there's very little daylight between he and I on on space policy in general. I was very heartened to find just how integral he is to the incoming space policy team for the Trump administration. He just wrote an article today. It's on the U.S. House of Representatives website. I will gladly be linking to it, in which he addressed why the moon is so important to America's national space policy. And I'd like to expand upon it because, as much as I love Congressman Bridenstine, I hate for him to steal my thunder because this is a huge portion of my book, so I want to elaborate a little bit. The moon is not just a desolate wasteland that happens to be near us. It is not just the thing that is responsible for the ocean's tides. It's something far more. It is a panoply of natural resources. It is also the kind of humanity's stepping stool into the wider solar system. It is also, from a scientific standpoint, a hugely interesting place, as many scientists surmise that the moon may actually have been a part of Earth and broken away billions of years ago. And there are some really wild scientific things that many scientists want to look at on the moon. But the most important thing, and then there's also the strategic implications of the moon. If you control critical orbits, not just the orbits around Earth, but if you control critical orbits at the Lagrange points between the Earth and the Moon, and you can control the orbits around the Moon, you can have a decisive military advantage over the other terrestrial strategic domains, land, sea, air, on Earth. I believe the old riff that he who controls, low Earth orbit controls the destiny of mankind. I'm paraphrasing now but it's more than low Earth orbit. So there's that as well. The moon is probably, though, most promising in terms of the economic incentives, as well as the fact that the natural resources on the moon are so abundant that they could be used to essentially create an entire space-based economy. Now, we have been very slow to recognize this. To us, the moon is just, this is kind of a cool rock, but we don't need to spend money. Why worry about spending money on going back to a place we've already been when there's nothing there, and we need to focus on what's going on here. Not so fast. The Chinese right now have a lunar rover, the Chang'e 5, which is set to begin sampling the moon's surface for looking for natural resources um, this year. Uh, if they're looking for a specific isotope which is located in the moon's regolith, the sand of the moon, it's called helium-3. Now, helium-3 is a rare earth mineral. It is not found in abundance on the planet Earth. But it is found, it is believed in abundance. I mean, we've certainly detected it there when we brought back rocks from the moon in the 1960s. Um, the Chinese want to test how much helium-3 is available because there's some question about that. It's believed that helium-3 is a much more efficient fuel source for nuclear fusion than the current fuel source of deuterium-tritium reactions. It's believed that a canister of refined helium-3 could power a city the size of Manhattan for over a year without needing to be replenished. Nuclear fusion, in many respects, is the only real alternative energy, and we have had trouble developing it because the deuterium-tritium reaction process is nowhere near what the efficiency of what the helium-3 is believed to be. China has also, outside of Germany and France, are leading the way in nuclear fusion, and right behind them is China. They have, for the last decade, invested billions upon billions of dollars into nuclear fusion research. China, as you know, is desperate for natural resources, particularly energy. Furthermore, they have a monopolistic view of those natural resources. In 2010, they tried to dominate the rare earth minerals market. Now, they lost out on that, but they still tried. They're basically, as the economists said, they're basically colonizing Africa right now in the quest to get the natural resources. Despite America's expenditures on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we have gotten very little in return in terms of the natural resources of Iraq, but also of Afghanistan, which has a lot of copper. It has, in fact, been the Chinese who have gained the most amount of oil contracts with Iraq, as well as the Chinese who dominates the copper mines of Afghanistan. In fact, there were reports in the New York Times back about 5 or 6 years ago about how American troops were basically protecting Chinese business interests in Afghanistan. And now they're turning their attention to the moon. Helium-3 could be the next big energy revolution. And in fact, it's believed that the moon could be the Persian Gulf of helium-3. If that is the case, China comes to dominate that, regardless of whether or not they're set to collapse. They're there now, and they plan on going back. If they find the helium-3 in abundance, they plan on going back to set up mining operations by 2020. I mean, unless China collapses tomorrow, we're still going to have to contend with this issue. And a China that is desperate to retain its dominance because its economy is collapsing, because there's a regime shift about to occur in China, is going to be a very dangerous China, as I noted in my vlog on the end of globalization and the coming collapse of China. China is really leading the way in this. And they're also looking at the other, such as aluminum and other, titanium is believed to have just blanket the bottom of the moon, the lower half of the moon. In the poles of the moon, we know for a fact that we suspect there's a lot of water in the form of ice. um, which can also be used as rocket propellant. There's just a lot of natural resources there, and the Chinese want it. Let's move over to Russia. Russia has announced that they are planning by 2030, the latest, to have a permanent manned presence on the moon. Neither the Russians nor the Chinese are going to the moon just to frolic around in the regolith, as our astronauts did. They don't want to just plant their flag and go home. They want to go up there and set up bases of operation for two things: economic incentives and strategic imperatives. They want to become the exclusive mining operations on the moon, and they want to become the permanent military dominant players on the moon. This is a very scary thing for us. Right now, America has no manned space presence. We have no manned space flight program. We have no serious plans to go to the moon, go to asteroids, and seek out the natural resources. We don't even think about that as a nation. We don't have a real commitment to space on a strategic level that both the Chinese and the Russians seem to be having. This is all very worrisome because we're going to have to play a game of catch up. Now, the upside is right now, Trump seems to be bringing in people who are very dedicated to filling in these strategic gaps. But the purpose of this video blog is to point out to you that space is not just a empty, endless black desert. It is actually a strategically and economically vital region. I think the future for America's and the world's energy production lies in space. It lies with helium-3. It lies with the production of nuclear fusion technology. I really think that's where we're headed if we can get the right fuel, which is, of course, helium-3. I think that once we're there, we're going to start figuring out ways to better survive in space, and we're going to start relying and building up the other materials in space that we need. I think we're going to see a massive lowering of costs if we start committing ourselves to this. The Russians see it and the Chinese see it. I don't know if enough Americans see it. Let's go back a little. Let's go a little bit further than that, though. When you look at the three major powers of the tripolar system, the quasi-tripolar system, because again, America is still the most dominant power on the planet. Russia's is actually, the Roscosmos is actually probably one of the better of the three in terms of manned space flight, particularly in terms of space stations. Remember, they inherited the old Soviet space capabilities, which, mind you, in the 90s withered on the vine. But because America and the West was worried about those Soviet rocket scientists selling their, former Soviet rocket scientists selling their capabilities to the highest bidder on the black market, the Americans and Western space companies actually went in and propped up the ailing Russian space program, Roscosmos, which limped on for about throughout the 90s until recently. The last couple of years, they've gotten their act together. In fact, Russia has become the kind of Walmart of rocket engines. Indeed, the engines that power America's national security space program, the United Launch Alliance, many of the rockets use the Russian RD-180 rocket engine, which is a strategic liability in and of itself. We initially, after they invaded Ukraine, placed sanctions on leaders of the Russian Space Agency, who in turn responded by telling the U.S. military that they would only sell the RD-180 rocket engine to America if the American government guaranteed that those engines would not be used to launch U.S. military satellites into space. While we have other rocket engines, the RD-180 is probably the most efficient and lowest cost. So this has got strategic implications to it. Russia has a decisive advantage, I think, in certain areas, particularly because now they're starting to realize that, hey, we need to get into the moon. That's more longer term. I think in the nearer term, the real threat's going to be from China, who are already on the moon and they already are actively developing techniques and technologies to stay on the moon and to create a manned presence on the moon. Um, America needs to wake up. America needs to see that there is economic advantages there. I was very heartened in 2014 when I was still on the Hill. We passed a law that basically allowed for private companies to lay claim to asteroids and other celestial, well, predominantly asteroids, no planets, asteroids for natural resource development. This is an important first step, but now there's some pushback from the kind of globalist internationalist types who do not think that space should be used for national um, uh, betterment. It should be these people want space to be the common heritage of all mankind. They don't believe any kind of national, interest should be served there. They want a globalist perspective, and I think this is very dangerous, as I pointed out throughout my talks on the issue. Um, and so from that group, we're getting a lot of pushback because they're saying that actually this law violates international law. It violates the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 because they're saying that in that treaty it explicitly states that no nation or entity can claim a celestial body like the moon or a planet for in the name of their country or their private interest. But we'll see about that. China, again, China's already there. Russia will be there no later than 2030, and they are not going there just to walk around. So Jim Bridenstine in his article is 100% correct. He's spot on. We've got to get Americans up there, and we've got to start developing these places for America, and we've got to build up the CIS lunar economy. We have to do this before the Russians and Chinese get the much coveted first mover advantage. Um, the next probably 4 years are going to be vital. It's going to be make or break. On the satellite front, America needs serious reform. The works of Thomas D. Taverny, uh, very telling about how we need to lower costs for the national security space policy community. It's too expensive to launch military satellites, which is why we have these long lag times between when we launch a new satellite and then when we can get others up there and then when we can replace those. It's called a vicious cycle of satellite acquisition. And so he recommends making the payloads lighter, which will then allow us to basically ride share um, the satellites on civilian rockets, which right now they cannot do. Would make us not have to depend on the Russians for the RD-180, for instance. So all of these are great ideas. Luckily, many people on the Trump team are supporting it. This is a big part of my book, and so I just wanted to remind everyone that national security is not just on Earth; it's also in the space around Earth, and we're losing there. Our position is. There was an individual I spoke to at a Christmas party in D.C. She works for a national security agency that deals with space. Um, and she told me that her quote was China is a stone's throw away from gaining space superiority. Um, this is deeply concerning because whoever controls the orbits around Earth is going to control Earth. And God help us if it's China. And God help us if it's Russia. And there's also going to be a serious rush to the moon because the moon has so much economic potential. And what we're seeing state capitalist regimes like China and Russia doing in other parts of the world, I would be very worried if they started doing on the moon because of the fact that they will seek to basically deny America and other countries access to those resources and they would seek to monopolize them. So there's a lot of goings on right now, and we really need to stay awake and stay attuned to space. We cannot let other priorities subsume space. It's simply too important. I would recommend please checking out my talk at the Institute of World Politics. That's on YouTube. I also have another talk that was given privately to a group of policymakers at the IWP. I'm working on getting it was back in October, I'm working on getting the computer file. Unfortunately, though, I have not been able to link up with the person I need to. But we're going to be talking a lot more in the coming weeks on space policy issues. I just wanted to do other things for the Weichert Report to let you all know that we're not just a one-trick pony. The notion that one day we could wake up and look at the moon through a telescope and see Russian and or Chinese flags there is it's worrying. It's worrying. I mean, I mean, you want to talk about America never being safe again. Losing space, whether it's losing our satellite capabilities or actually physically losing space, the key orbits in space, that should keep us up at night. It isn't cheap, though, what I'm recommending, which is space dominance, but it is necessary. In the long run, it will get cheaper the more we develop the methods and means for living in space, which can only be done by going in space repeatedly. So, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm trying to keep these shorter. For the Weichert Report, I'm Brandon Weichert. Cheers, my friends. Here's to a bold new world.